All right, welcome to Office Hours.
Yo, what is up? We are back with another Office Hours. If you missed the last one, go watch that and then come right back here. This is Reuben. If you guys don't know him, Reuben Radding, incredible photographer, teaches workshops, and we have polled questions using Instagram. So if you want to ask a question for the next Office Hours, follow Reuben or I on Instagram. That's how we source the questions. We're gonna hop right into it.
Yeah, we had a lot of questions about non-photography influences, which I have many. One of the first that comes to mind is this musician named Anthony Braxton, who I'm a huge fan of. And getting into Braxton kind of changed my life. It's almost impossible to give a simple answer to what he is. He's a composer, he's a jazz musician, he's a player of many instruments, just insanely productive. To this day, incredible amounts of work. And I got into him from reading this book about him called Forces in Motion, which it really blew my mind. Braxton was making music for reasons that were really new to me. Like he wrote pieces that were basically impossible. Like he wrote symphonies that were meant to be played by multiple orchestras on different planets. Mm-hmm. He wrote music that had the idea of healing rainforests. Ideas that on the surface seem really impossible, like, you know, reaching way beyond the idea of just like, hey, here's some music that people might enjoy listening to, you know, like stuff of a much higher purpose, even if it seemed kind of crazy. And it really inspired me to think that I could be reaching so much higher with what I was doing as a musician and as an artist. And Braxton really changed my view of what I could be, what I could do, and the idea of just dreaming a lot bigger, you know, dreaming a lot bigger than just, you know, making a cool tune or impressing some people or whatever, but like, you know, having a much larger mission. Also really had a life-changing experience reading a book called Writing Down the Bones by Natalie Goldberg. It's a book about how to do creative writing. But in that book, you learn, I mean, everything you could need to know about having an art practice of any kind, or a practice of any kind. So yeah, that book really, really turned me around, and I still refer to it a lot when I talk about practice. Yeah, I have many others that I could name. But those are a couple that I feel are important.
Do you think, so to build on the question, do you think it's important for other people to draw inspiration from people outside of the photography realm?
Well, yeah, I mean, I can't really imagine why you wouldn't. I mean, maybe the problem some people have is not seeing how to connect their other interests, the other things that they're excited by. You know, if there's movies that you're really excited about that really speak to you on some spiritual level. I mean, those things are worthy influences. You know, it's too easy to think that taking pictures is just about taking pictures. You know, there's a lot more that this practice can be to you. We're back.
We're back with the next topic.
Back in a new location. Right. So we had a lot of questions about composition.
Yep.
About, you know, how to judge it and how to do it, all that. And those questions are very general when you really look at them all together. And it sort of makes me think that the larger question about composition is what is it other than objects in space, right? Because we're looking at all this stuff in the world and we're trying to make a picture, and the first thing people think about is, okay, well, I'm gonna put these things together in these different places. And when you're looking at stuff in the world, they're just stuff. And what makes it a composition is the frame, right? So once you put that frame around stuff, now there's a composition, right? So there's more that can be done with making a frame than just containing things, right? So if all you're doing is you see rock, tree, dog, boy, and you draw a rectangle around them, I mean, that is a composition of some kind, but it's not really doing anything with the possibilities of the frame. So one of the things that I talk to people about is trying to create pictures with the idea of there being some sort of larger shape that's created within that frame. And it has to be in the frame to have that shape. Here's our very badly drawn rectangular frame. The things that you're making could create a shape like this within the frame, right? Or you could have something that kind of has this sort of shape going on within it. There's no end to these shapes, and some of the simplest ones work the best. Like, here's one, a very imperfect cross. Imperfection in these shapes is really helpful. If things are too neat, like this, it's not very provocative. So like this gets into something that I talk about a lot with my students is correctness is not usually all that helpful. It seems contrary to the challenge of making a picture out of the world. You're like, wait, I have to organize this chaos. I have to organize this material. But if you organize everything too neatly, it has kind of no gravity, no weight, much like this grid that I just made here. So grids can be tricky. But then let's say you have a frame where there's a few different things going on. You've got, an imperfect cross, you've got an element down here, an element up here. This starts to have relationships now. The things in the corners have relationships. The things that exist in these divisions of the frame start to have relationships in a different way, right? So this is something that I think about. Stephen Shore, in his amazing book, The Nature of Photographs, talks a lot about, where he makes a distinction between active frames and passive frames. So the passive frame being just that the edges of the photograph are just simply where that world ends. There's no particular reason for those edges to be exactly where they are. It's just that's where the picture ends. And then active frames are where the material in the picture seems to be coming in from the edges, right? Like it's built from those edges in, and you can really feel that. And it's such a wonderfully succinct way of demonstrating what a difference the power of the frame can make. And he rightfully points out that not all pictures are just one or the other, right? Some have in some ways active frames, and some parts are maybe passive, and it doesn't have to be all one way. That's a really, I assume from these questions that people are frustrated, right? That they're feeling like there's something they're not seeing in their work that they want, and they don't know what that's going to be made of. And so, like, that's why I'm answering in this way, is I feel like I've had that same frustration when I was a lot newer to photography. I had no idea what composition was. People would talk about it, and I just thought, it just seemed like this great mystery, And one of the big eurekas for me was looking at work by people like, say, Gilles Peress or Alex Webb, who very clearly divide the frame into all these parts. And sometimes it's really overt. You take like Gilles' picture on the front of his Telix Iran book. It looks like it's a frame divided into 4 parts. They're unequal parts. Some of the things in some of those parts are very close. Some of those things are farther away, but it creates this very strange spatial relationship. That kind of stuff is not just by happenstance. I mean, this is somebody really seeing a way to use the frame to create a more dynamic world than just, well, this is what I saw. And then the other thing about working that way is, it seems when you first become aware of these possibilities of how to divide the frame and all that, it seems impossible doing street photography, because you're like, wait, I barely have enough time to even render this content, right, let alone think about where to, how to make that kind of a crazy frame. Yeah. And, like a lot of people, I find it kind of unsatisfying to just sort of find a place in the world that seems to already have that built in and then wait for good content to come into it. It's a very, a kind of a boring way to be, and it often makes boring pictures because it feels like kind of set up even though it's still life unfolding. So, it is a huge challenge to start to absorb these ideas and then put them to use in your photos. It's not easy. But I think that the more you pay attention to this stuff and the more that you become aware of the possibility, the more you have an idea of like what you're chasing, and it starts to happen. It starts to come into your work. So I think it's a really interesting aspect of what we're doing that we may or may not be fully aware of, but I think becoming more aware of it is the path to growth.
Yeah.
Right?
Yo, are you looking for a film lab? If you are, I know where you should go. You should go to Gelatin Labs. They have customers that send in their film from all over the country, so you can trust them with processing and scanning your film at the highest quality. And if you're in the New York area, you could just drop off your film. They got drop boxes in the city, in Brooklyn. They got drop boxes in Jersey. So go check them out. Hit that link in the description. Go show some love to Gelatin Labs.
Yeah, and then we had a lot of questions about projects. And much like the composition question or questions, it feels very broad to look at all those questions because some of them are about starting projects, some of them are about like why to even do projects, some are about what you do with projects, making products or presentations of things. And so it makes me think that people are on fire about the topic and not necessarily knowing why. Right? And I feel that. Like some people, like a lot of documentary photographers I know, their whole interest is in what their photos are about, right? So their interest is I need to tell this story or give attention to an issue, something like that. And so we don't necessarily have that doing so-called street photography. Like I'm not trying to tell anyone's story. I'm not even necessarily trying to document anything, though it may happen. So what it makes me think about is the larger question of what you need, which to me is some stakes. You need something at stake other than making pictures, right? So for some, that's survival. For some, that's trying to make the world better. For some, it's a spiritual journey. For some, it's trying to give others a view of their world in their own way. Whatever it is, you need that. I think we all need that. Like, I think it's way too easy to do any sort of art practice in a very kind of surface way. If you're like me, you get into these sometimes long days that can be somewhat boring, where you feel like nothing's happening and whatever, and you can start to really question what you're even doing this for. And this, I'm applying this to practice now, but this is really well directed at projects. Like, what are the stakes for you with a project, right? If it's just wanting to have a project, well, I relate. I know what that's like, and I relate it back to my time as a musician. I always remember back in the end of the 90s, beginning of the 2000s, I was very confused about my music not having a purpose outside of just being music, right? And I knew all these other musicians who seemed to have these great, deep senses of purpose. They were either trying to fight injustice, or they had a religious motivation behind their music. All these different ways of orienting themselves with their art, and I didn't really feel like any of those were organic to what I was doing. But it was unsatisfying to just think of what I was doing as just, sound wonder. What I was missing was that I had already had things that were very much at stake for me in my music. Survival being one of them. I made my living at it. So I needed to make music to survive. But also my mental and spiritual stability. It was the thing that connected me to my world. So connection to others is everything. And that doesn't mean you have to do what looks to other people like connection. It doesn't mean you have to go out and talk to everybody. It's not about that. It's about being in a process that dissolves the sense of distance between you and the rest of humanity, right? It's not about that guy over there, though he's part of it. It's about putting yourself in the path of vulnerability, of asking questions, of uncertainty, right? So if you're one of the people asking about projects and you feel very uncertain, you don't know why you're even doing what you do, just sink very deeply into that, you know? Wait until that stuff starts to feel clearer. Every time I think, oh wow, now I'm really a lot closer to understanding what this is all about. I mean, it's going to be a real short time later that I go, wait a minute. Then there's this whole other level of stuff I haven't considered, you know? The good news is it's endless. The bad news is it's endless. So, yeah, projects are, I think the biggest mistake you can make is looking at what other people have done and think that you need to do that. Same with the pictures, right? It's like if you think you got to make pictures like the ones you've seen, then you're not going to make your own contribution the same way, you know? And projects, we know too much about what a photo project looks like, right? So you think, you educate yourself, you go look at everybody's projects and you see, oh, they have this, they have that, they have this kind of way of tying things together and making a theme or whatever. You don't have to do any of those things. You know, those things have been done, and being able to fulfill that surface impression of what a project is doesn't make it great, right? Everyone who watches this is probably smart enough to analyze their favorite photo book and think, okay, so now my job is make enough pictures to stick in there and fulfill this bucket or whatever. And I mean, I just think that's really shallow, ultimately. And we've all probably been there on one level or another. You know, I want something to sell, or I want something to differentiate myself, or I want something to, you know, put into the world and, you know, have a souvenir. All of that's fine. And maybe it doesn't have to be so serious. You know, like I think about, you know, growing up, we would make little zines, or, you know, I had friends who made little Xerox zines and stuff. Things that 20 people were going to maybe see. Maybe. Like 10 to 20 people were ever going to see these. But we had so much fun. And you look back on them, you're like, I like that, you know? Let's face it, if anyone who's asking these questions is, you know, relatively new to photography or are very young, the way you grow is by failure, right? So you got to do something and then look at it and go, oh man, there's these things that I don't like about this. And that's how you grow and do something better the next time. If you don't do something, then there's no way to improve. On the one hand, there's a lot of deep questions to ask yourself about projects and products. But on the other hand, just do it. You know, just go ahead and do stuff.
Yeah.
You know, and then do more. I don't know. Should we say anything more?
No, that's it. That's going to do it for this episode of Office Hours. We'll do this again in July, August?
Yeah.
Summertime. We'll catch you then. Go follow Reuben. And that's where we source the questions, like I said before. So do that. We'll see you guys in the hot summer dog days.
Now when they see us in the streets, all they wanna do is take pics, and I'm like, okay.